Okay, guys, hold on. I don't know if I like that. Ooh, that's a terrible, terrible view of me. Okay, guys, so we're gonna get some honesty out of the way, even if it does mean a bit of a longer intro. Today's book is Divergent by Veronica Roth. And the honesty that I'm gonna put out there is that I read this book, gosh, what month is it? Okay. I think I read this book 3 months ago. And the deal is I will give myself a little bit of grace because at the time I did not have the time to do a video. So, okay, I didn't get it to it right away. But the fact that it has taken me 3 months to actually get around to this video kind of goes to how I feel about the book. Straight up, not a bad book. However, I obviously didn't want to talk about it. And even then, I can't tell you how many days, how many weekends I have said, I'm going to do the book review for Divergent, I'm going to do the book review for Insurgent. Notice I didn't say the last one, Allegiant, because I still haven't gotten to it. So today, I was like, all right, after work, I'm going to do the book review. On my way home from work, I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to make cookies. To keep on with this really long story, I came down here, I wrote my notes, I went upstairs, I made cookies, I came down here, I made notes for Insurgent, and then I for some reason needed to go back upstairs, and I stayed up there for like 2 hours. I mean, the only good thing about me wasting all this time is that my candle, I wish, oh, you can't even see it. I wish that these videos could be scratched and snipped, because this is the most amazing candle ever. I just cannot seem to bring myself to want to do the videos for Divergent and Insurgent, and obviously I haven't even read Allegiant. While the books, as I said, it's not bad, but by the time I got to the end of Insurgent, I said, I don't really want to keep reading. There was nothing about these books that was so outstanding that I wanted more. Please keep in mind, the book is not bad. Insurgent is not bad, but for me, they lacked a bit of zhuzh. What I've heard is that the movies are bad, so whether or not I ever actually watch the movies will be seen. It's probably gonna be one of those deals where it's on TV, and I'm like, okay, I'll watch it, and then I stop watching it, and I just DVR it, and then I can fast forward through all the commercials. Not high on my priority list. Anywho, so for any of you who are unfamiliar with Divergent, and I'm gonna say there's gotta be some, because I was unfamiliar with Divergent and it has been out for almost 10 years now. So yes, oh, my necklace. I will give you the synopsis because you may have no idea what's going on. The main character is a girl named Triss, or her real name is Beatrice Pryor. She lives in a society that is divided into factions. First, there is the factionless, which, if you're familiar with vocabulary and syntax, you understand that they are no longer in any of the factions. The other factions are Amity, which they're the peaceful group, Dauntless, who are the brave, Abnegation, who are the selfless, Erudite, who are the smart, and then there's Candor, who are the honest. So people are either born into them and stay into them, or when they are at a certain age, which is 16 or 17, they are tested, and they can test out of what they're born into, and they can then choose, I'd rather be Candor or I'd rather stay where I am. Triss is born into Abnegation, but she never feels like she quite fits in. Or actually, at this point, she's still Beatrice. She never feels like she's quite right for Abnegation. Like, she does think of others, but she kind of thinks of herself first. So then she gets tested, and she tests as Divergent, which again, if you're familiar with vocabulary, you know that it means that she doesn't fit into one. And she tests as Abnegation, Dauntless, and Erudite. However, her test monitor says Divergent's not good. Like, everybody knows Divergent is a no-no, which I'm gonna do a little side note here and say, especially in Divergent, I felt like the importance of Divergent was never quite stressed enough. Yes, I got it that being divergent was something you didn't want to be, but why? I never thought that was quite explained. Anywho, Beatrice, she's told, hey, look, you did test divergent, but we're just gonna say that you were abnegation. And then at the big ceremony where all of the people who had just gone through this test have to declare their new allegiance, her brother Caleb, who they are very similar in age. They're like 9 months apart. So they tested at the same time. He surprisingly, shockingly chooses to be erudite, and then she decides to be dauntless. So the thing here is that, especially for abnegation, is kind of shameful, particularly if all the children in a certain family choose to leave a faction. Then it's like, well, obviously there's something wrong with this faction, and that is compounded by the fact that her dad is something of a leader within abnegation, and so there had already been some kind of grumblings underneath about abnegation, because they are, as the selfless, they're the ones who are supposed to make the wisest decisions. And so other factions and other faction leaders are saying, oh, well, they're doing things that discriminate against us, that hold us back. And so, hey, yeah, if those faction leaders' kids are leaving, then that just proves our point. In any case, Triss gets to Dauntless, and the first thing they have to do is jump onto a moving train. And then they have to jump off of the moving train. Or is it just jump off? I don't know. As I said, it's been like 3 months. Big idea here is that they have to jump off a moving train, and these people are like, excuse me? And so yeah, from the get-go, this faction is pushing its initiates. And once they get to Dauntless headquarters, which another thing is because the whole place takes place, or the whole story takes place in Chicago, and it's sort of like a post-apocalyptic Chicago, but because I'm not very familiar with Chicago, I was really confused as to the layout. Obviously, each faction had their own section, their own sector, but I thought this was something, and maybe it's because I was listening to it and so I was able to really focus, but I thought this was another aspect that Roth just didn't quite develop well enough. In any case, she gets to the Dauntless headquarters and she meets this guy named Four. They immediately, not in a romantic way, but she meets this guy named Four because he is going to be the leader of this new class of initiates. And so what they learn is that only the top 10 initiates are actually going to be dauntless, which means everybody else is going to be factionless. I can't actually tell you how many initiates there are, because what they do is they separate them into 2 groups. The initiates who were born into dauntless and the initiates who've chosen dauntless. And within her group, there's probably almost 10. There's Triss, Will, Christina, Al, I think his name is Edward, his girlfriend, Peter, Molly, and who's the last guy? Drew. So yeah, there's almost 10 there. So maybe this group is like of initiates total is 20. Automatically, you're like, I didn't even do anything, and I'm facing being factionless, and factionless are essentially homeless. Like, they get the worst jobs, they get the worst pay. It's just something you do not want to end up being. She gets into this initiation process, this training process, and she's not very good. But she goes through some struggles, and she starts to kind of find herself and to find her bravery, and basically by sheer force of will, she becomes a top contender. But in that, as I mentioned, she makes friends with this girl named Christina and 2 guys, Will and Al. And her enemies are Peter, Molly, and the guy whose name I keep forgetting, Drew. Because she keeps getting better, and then there's one instance in particular, she makes an enemy of Peter, who is like the top dog. He's the guy who said, somebody else is number one, I'm going to physically harm this person so this person will decide to leave so I can be number one. You do not want to run into this guy. He then, and this is something I don't quite understand. So he then enlists or is just joined by Drew and Al, and here's a bit of a spoiler. So they attempt to kill Tris, because by this point now she is Tris, all right? Because she's decided to change her identity to fit into this dauntless identity that she's going to set up for herself. But the thing that I don't understand is Al. So Al's a really big dude, but he's like the soft-hearted kind of big dude. Dauntless, I don't really understand. I think they explained, I think Roth explained why Al chose Dauntless. I don't remember. I don't care to go back and find out. He has chosen to kind of lay low, like to do just well enough that he does not get kicked out of a top spot, but he does not want to physically harm people, which is something that they're supposed to be doing. Like they're hand-to-hand combat in certain situations. I do not understand why he joined Peter's group to harm Tris. In any case, what they're gonna do is there's this bridge with this river and they're gonna throw her over the bridge, but before that, they're going to molest her. They're gonna sexually assault her. She is rescued by Four, who around this time, they are recognizing their feelings for each other and they do eventually get into a relationship. So after she's rescued, she essentially rebuffs Al. She's like, I can't believe you would do this to me. You're not the person I thought. Oh, you know what? I think why he decided to do this was she had earlier rebuffed his romantic advances. Like he thought that she liked him, and then when she said no, I think he was so embarrassed that that's why he was willing to do this. Neither here nor there. Here's another spoiler. Al is so upset with himself that he does commit suicide. He jumps off the same bridge that they were going to throw her off of. Actually, a little bit before that, I'm bouncing around here, obviously, even though I have my notes. Maybe I should use them. Her mother. So the thing was, obviously, she and her brother deciding to leave abnegation was a bit of a shame to the family. And I think particularly going to Dauntless was like, her parents just were not going to show up for visitation day. Surprise, surprise, her mom shows up. What she does is she essentially says, look, you need to lie low. You need to fly under the radar. And Tris is like, I don't understand why, but it's because she's Divergent. Because people are going after the Divergent. Through this, she also learned that her mother was born Dauntless, which I guess they don't talk about where they came from. Moving forward, Al has killed himself, and now there are these things called simulations that the initiates have to go through, and those expose the initiates' greatest fears. Tris is able to use her divergence to beat the system. Like, her divergence enables her to see that things are not real and she can escape them. And part of this training is to see who can defeat their fears first, who can finish the simulation first. And that is really what is putting her at the top of the class. Then Four, who we realize, here's a bit of a spoiler. So another abnegation leader is a guy named Marcus, and he is the top abnegation leader. And there is always this story about him having a son who chose to leave. We learned that Four is that son, and his name is Tobias. He got the nickname Four because he only has 4 fears, which apparently is the fewest amount of fears that anybody's ever had. So he was at the top of his class. And so this is stuff that he's sharing with her. They're strengthening their relationship, and they're like, ooh, we like each other, blah, blah, blah. I forget really what goes on. Oh, I know. So they have their final test, and Tris is at the top. But for this final test, they are, I think in the end, they're injected with a serum. So for these simulations, they are injected with a serum so that the hallucination can take place. She wakes up and she realizes that everyone around her is getting ready for something. And she's like, they're basically zombies. She's like, what's going on here? Here's big spoiler. I don't know how early Janine is introduced if you've ever seen the movie. So I don't know how early she's introduced in the movies. My impression was right from the very beginning. But Janine is really a small character until about this moment where what is going on, Abnegation has some kind of secret information. And Janine, who is the head of Erudite, wants this information. And so she's going to use the Dauntless to attack Abnegation in order to get this information. And that is what the serum was. However, the serum does not work on the Divergent, which is why Triss is not under its control. So as they're headed back to the train station, she discovers that 4 is also Divergent. Now they're on this whole mission to stop what's going on. They're caught, and then 4 is injected with a different serum, which does work. And then, here's a little bit of a fast forward. We find out that he is put in charge of overseeing the simulation, because the Dauntless don't realize what they're doing. But yeah, they're killing Abnegation members. Triss they're trying to drown her. She's rescued by her mother. Her mother ends up getting killed. And then Triss, on her way to the Dauntless headquarters, where she doesn't know this, but this is where 4 is. So she's headed to the Dauntless headquarters because that is where she believes the control center is. On her way, she runs into Marcus, who is 4's father, and she runs into her own father. Also, in her quest or her mission to get to headquarters, she runs into Will, and Will was one of her friends, but as he is under the simulation, he's not really accountable for his actions, but she also can't talk him out of his reactions or his actions, so she ends up killing him. They get to the headquarters. She realizes, oh wow, 4 is here, and along the lines, her dad, spoiler, her dad dies. And now she has to talk 4 out of his simulation. And the simulation is essentially kind of turning things in reverse, where his friends are his enemies and his enemies are his friends. She's able to do it. They steal all the footage. They turn off the simulation, and then they get out of Dodge. They meet back up with Marcus. I think they also grab Peter. There we go. And now they are on a train to Amity headquarters, because as the Peacemakers, they're like Switzerland. They're neutral. So that's where we end. There's a lot of good stuff going on. However, once I read Insurgent, I did realize kind of how slow that Divergent is. Not a whole lot really happens. I actually couldn't remember the sequence. I couldn't remember which came first, Insurgent or what's the third one? Not Resurgent. Whatever the third one is. And so actually I started the third one and I realized I had no idea what was going on. So that meant I got the order wrong. So I did go back and listen to Insurgent. I was planning on jumping right into the third book, but I was so kind of underwhelmed by the time I got to the end of Insurgent that I just was not, even as exciting as it was, I wasn't motivated to get to the last one, so we'll see when that happens. At the end of this book, I was left feeling like, oh, okay, so that's it. And I think some of that was because as much of action as there was, I never felt like we got to a peak moment. And when you formulate a book, that's kind of what happens in the middle, is something really big happens. And then once you get to the end, another really big thing happens. And I didn't feel like anything really big happened until the end. Part of me is questioning when Triss's mother comes for visitation and tells Triss, you need to lay low. Why doesn't Triss do it? Because this could have been a really good moment of, okay, so I don't lay low, and that's where my problems happen. And in a sense, that's when her problems do happen, because that's when the guys attack her. But it was such a short moment that it doesn't really qualify for me as a big moment because there was no turning point really. And yes, Al kills himself, but it doesn't set anything off in Tris. And I guess this just goes back to characterization where why doesn't Tris, like, she literally does not even try to listen to her mother. Because I think at this point she had already realized that her divergence can help her in certain situations, particularly the simulations. So I just don't understand why she literally did not heed her mother's advice. This sort of snowballs into the big problem that I had with Tris. And it's not necessarily Tris herself, but it's how Roth developed Tris. We see her arrive and she is completely unprepared for this life she has chosen. One of the first things they're told to do is to shoot a gun, and she's like, abnegation, we don't do that kind of thing. So I can't even imagine picking it up, much less shooting it. So yeah, she's not very good. Although she works really hard, and by the end of class, she's better. And that's kind of the story of her life, is she works just sheer willpower and determination gets her to a very strong point in the rankings. But we never really see any of that. We kind of see it that first instance at the gun range, in like the next day when she's like, oh, I'm really sore. But from there, we don't see much. Like if you read Hunger Games, you see Katniss's evolution. You see the way that her mindset starts to change and how she has to adapt and the way she's thinking about things and trying to figure stuff out so that she can get her own game plan together so she can succeed in the end. And with Tris, we don't see her game plan. We don't see her evolution. All we know is I wasn't good. I worked hard. Now I'm good. Sure, there was a moment where they played Capture the Flag and she realized the only way we're going to be able to figure out where the other team is if we do something crazy like climb to the top of that Ferris wheel. And so this is out of her element, but she decides that's what she's going to do. Now we're starting to see her leadership skills, but otherwise there's just nothing. And I think without a really strong protagonist, the book loses some of its dynamicness. Not to say that she's not strong. She's a strong-willed character. I do like how determined she is. She doesn't back down from things. So yes, in many ways, Tris is a very strong character, but I think the problem is we don't see how she gets strong physically and mentally and emotionally. Let's go and talk about other things. It was a well-written book. I do think the downfall was some of its development, both with characters and plot, just because while the plot was good and we kept encountering obstacles, it wasn't particularly exciting. And for a fantasy kind of post-apocalyptic sci-fi-ish kind of deal that's all about kind of in a sense war, we need to have more. I did like that Tris was not strong in the beginning. Referencing Hunger Games again, Katniss was always strong. She didn't really need to learn anything to survive. Her problems were more her people skills, whereas Tris, I do not know why she chose Dauntless, because even though she wasn't necessarily cut out for abnegation, she wasn't a very forceful personality. So the fact that she chose Dauntless would obviously push her to her limits. And so I liked how she did go from someone who had no clue what was going on, what she was doing, how she was gonna succeed, to somebody who was able to be top of the class. I thought, let me not move my contact around. I did think that Roth did a great job depicting that enmity between Peter and his cohorts and Tris, because you really do hate them. There's nothing redeeming about that little band of bad guys. Peter, he stabbed his biggest competition in the eyeball with a butter knife in the middle of the night, which, can somebody please explain to me how he achieved that in complete and total darkness? Maybe he had a pen light that we didn't know about. Maybe it was a lucky swing. Maybe he was aiming for something else and that's just what he hit. But he's ruthless, you know? And I like that she, again, it kind of does go back to her strong personality. She wasn't gonna back down from him. And even, so as I said, there were moments where they had to fight each other. You know automatically that she is going to be facing Peter in the ring. Gives her the biggest beatdown of her life, which again is something that we don't see much of. She gets knocked out, she wakes up the next day, and then we really get nothing from there, except that she tries really hard. And then her next fight is against Molly, the girl from his gang, and she beats Molly to a pulp, which I'm just like, I mean, yeah, you love that she beat Molly, but at the same time, how did she accomplish that? Which maybe it's just something I'm forgetting. But I liked that she knew there would be consequences for beating Molly, but at the same time, she was going to do it anyways because she had to show Molly she wasn't going to back down. She had to show Peter she wasn't going to back down. I thought that was very effective, where from the very beginning, we get this idea of Peter from the outside. He's very angelic, but on the inside, he's a devil. Which also reminds me with Triss, I liked how normal, how average she was. In appearance, she's attractive enough, but I liked that she wasn't this great and terrible beauty. Her beauty was gonna lie, like her attractiveness to the reader was gonna come from who she was on the inside. And so, you know, while we all love, like, whether we like it or not, we are drawn to attractive people. And so as much as we want things to be equal, we want everybody to be represented in our heads, these protagonists are always going to be gorgeous. You read Harry Potter and they're all really attractive people. They're not nearly as attractive as the actors are, but we kind of go along with what we see in the actors. So I did like, again, that Triss, she had some redeeming physical characteristics, but on the whole, she was a knockout. I was going to kind of connect that back to 4 and her relationship, but I'm not because I don't feel like it. Last thing is that I liked that she did question things, because even though there was a lot that we didn't see with her growth, like her physical growth, from the very beginning, she was always asking why. And because she was asking why, we were asking why. And that ups the stakes. That creates tension, that creates suspense, and that makes you always wonder, like, what's gonna happen next. And it also adds to her depth. It adds to her character. And it makes her someone that you believe can do anything because she doesn't just sit back and accept it. If you saw my review of The Cruel Prince, you know what I'm talking about. I cannot stand a protagonist who just lets things happen to her. But with Triss, you know that's not gonna happen because she has an analytical mind. She sees something, and if it doesn't make sense to her, she's gonna be thinking about it, she's gonna look into it, she's gonna try to figure it out. On the con side, I don't understand, and this goes back to her divergence, this goes back to simulation, how can people not see that she's divergent in those simulations? As I said, 4 is divergent. He figures out she's divergent because he's watching the simulations, but does he figure it out because he's divergent, or are there traits that people can look for to discern whether or not people are divergent? Even with that, when she's in these simulations and she uses her divergent skills, her divergent powers to get out, it's like, okay, so if she is in a tank full of water and she's encased in a glass case, that's where I was going, but then I realized I was repeating a word like almost immediately. And she realizes all she has to do is tap on the glass and it can shatter. How does that not get reflected in the simulation recording or whatever they're watching in the booth. If she uses her abilities to get out of the simulations, how does that not register? It goes back to her not hiding her divergence. If this is the place where her divergence is most obvious, why doesn't she try harder to escape her simulations without using those extrasensory abilities? I don't know. It's all, maybe I'm just being too analytical with it, but it just does not make sense to me. So let's backtrack some. I know I feel like talking out of both sides of my mouth. I like that Triss is not good at everything, that she has to work for it. However, it's like once she does set her mind to it and gets good at it, she is good at everything. There's really nothing that she struggles with. And maybe if they had put her in the ring with Peter again, she would have struggled rather than putting her against Molly. Granted, Molly is bigger than her, but couldn't she have struggled at something? Like once she masters the gun, she's brilliant at it. Once she masters wrestling or you know, MMA or WWF or whatever that is when they're in the ring and they're hitting boxing, I don't know what they want to call it. She's brilliant at that too. Like once she climbs to the top of the Ferris wheel, she has no fears of height. Like, and people say this to her, they point these things out to her, like not everybody can be as good as you are. And so I would have liked her to have an Achilles heel, to have something that she just could not overcome. And maybe what she couldn't overcome is her ability to stop. You know, I don't know. But it did get a little monotonous at times where, I mean, you want to root for her and there's this great sense of accomplishment in knowing she will succeed, but nobody likes somebody who's perfect. Even if they started out flawed, they can't just be completely perfect by the end. Just not going to work that way. Unless it works for you, then please let me know. I wish Al had been developed a bit more, because I felt like there was more to him that we just didn't get. Like, which again, this may have been discussed and I completely missed it or forgot it. Why did he choose Dauntless? And then once he got to Dauntless, why didn't, I don't know. I guess I was going to ask, why didn't he try harder? But he doesn't try harder on purpose because he's too soft-hearted. He does not want to hurt people. And, but yeah, it just goes back to why choose Dauntless. And I guess maybe the thing is, Dauntless had changed some. So with Four's class, he had been number 1, and then this guy named Eric had been number 2. And Eric is then the leader. Oh my gosh, there's a bug on the wall. Excuse me. It was an ant. It was a big one. Eric, he was number 2. And of course, there was a bunch of rivalry between the two. And then Eric got promoted, which, let me change this. That's a little bit better. If you're just joining me, it's a little bit of a different angle. Sorry, it just wasn't. Anyways, Eric. He had been promoted to a pretty high position, youngest guy to ever get to that position. What we learn is that Four had been asked as well. Four had been asked first because he was first in his class, and Four had turned it down because Four had insight that I guess other people don't, maybe because he's divergent. I think it also comes down to why he chose Dauntless. And so, yeah, he just didn't want that kind of power. Within this regime, this new regime, I forget how long it's been since we've had this new regime that Eric is now part of, they have been turning the Dauntless into more than just fearless members of a faction, but they're more like soldiers, which obviously, because that's what Janine was prepping them for so that they could go after abnegation. Maybe this just wasn't something Al was expecting. He was not expecting to having to be so ruthless within this faction, but we see that he can hurt people, like he can take them out with a 1-2 punch, but he doesn't want to, which is why he tends to lose the rest of his matches. And then at the visitation, I don't know what happened. We all know me. I looked ahead and I knew he was gonna kill himself. And so at this visitation, nobody could find him. He didn't show up. His parents don't know where he is. So I'm thinking, okay, this is when he's killed himself and that's when we're gonna find out. But no, he's just in their room, sitting there. And I don't remember what had happened recently. Maybe they learned their scores or something, or their rankings, and somehow that upset him. But we don't learn why he's sitting on the bed, why he's not gonna go see his parents. We don't really understand his motivations for anything. And then, yeah, obviously he joins Peter's gang in trying to assault Tris, and then he kills himself. And it's just like, yeah, he was troubled. Like, that was really obvious. But there was so much more to him. But it felt like we had this hard exterior, this soft interior, yet nothing in between. Like, we couldn't connect the two. They were two separate entities within one person, and we were just supposed to accept that. Wish we'd gotten more on him. As much as you don't want to like Eric, I did like Eric because he was a good villain, because you knew that his dislike of 4 was more out of competition, jealousy than anything. And so I guess I get a 6 satisfaction out of seeing people exert their authority when we all know they shouldn't, but they get away with it because it's a novel. I'm impressed with Veronica Roth. If I remember correctly, I think she went to Northwestern, which, if you don't know, that's in Chicago. So I think, hello, it's set in Chicago. That's why it's set in Chicago. I'm not even gonna try to pretend or repeat what I just said. That's why it's set in Chicago, because we write what we know. I think this was her MFA program she was doing. And if you don't know anything about school, we have undergraduate, and then at least for people in the fine arts, you tend to go with an MFA, Master of Fine Arts, because there's no point in getting a doctorate, a PhD. So MFA is kind of the highest level that you really want to pay for. And so I think she wrote this, I don't know if it was for class or if it was just while she was in her MFA program for creative writing. And so I am impressed that she wrote this book, and I think essentially as soon as she graduated, she got it published. So that says a lot about her. I'm unsure as to how impressed I should be. Should I be impressed that she was good enough to have something published immediately upon graduation? Or should I think of it as, well, obviously this is just her first book, and so she can only get better? In any case, good for you, Veronica Roth. You had a wildly successful trilogy that got turned into movies, and I think she's written, well, she at least has, I think it's Divergent from 4's point of view, which was so confusing for me before I really got into the world of Divergent. I had no clue what that book meant. That's Divergent. See you soon for Insurgent. Bye!